Welcome to this first video focused on the Python library called Pandas. We're going to jump right to it because it is very important in the context of processing, cleaning, doing all kinds of things that we need to do to data sets. If you click on Pandas, you can see that there are 6 different lessons here. We're going to dive straight into this first one, creating, reading, and writing to get started with Pandas. I have copied the notebook into my own Kaggle account, which you can do the same, and we'll go through each of the concepts introduced in this first Pandas lesson. So as was mentioned several times already, Pandas is super important and useful. It's really the library that makes Python a great tool for data analytics. The biggest reason is that it creates these objects that allow you to put data into them and apply various types of useful functions to those data sets. So we're going to learn about those today. We're going to learn about how to create those objects called data frames and data series, and how to load those data from files. So let's get started. You can see here in the first line of code, you're going to import the Pandas library. You'll notice that we import it as the Pandas library as PD. This is an abbreviation of Pandas. Whenever we need to call Pandas functions, we can just use pd.function name. There are 2 core objects in the Pandas library, the data frame and the series. The data frame we'll talk about first. This is probably the most important object that you'll use in this entire course. It is a 2-dimensional, almost like a spreadsheet representation of data that has what's called columns and rows, just like a spreadsheet. And there are various ways that you can use it. Let's get started by first creating a data frame using the Pandas notation, PD for the Pandas library, .data frame. In parentheses, you have some syntax instructing Pandas to create a 2-dimensional data frame with yes and no as the column names and 0 and 1 as the row indices. 0 and 1 were automatically created by the Pandas library. We have values of 50 and 21, 1, 3, 1, and 2 that are inputted as the values that fit in here. You'll notice that there's some Python type objects contained in here. You can see a dictionary indicated by the curly brackets. You have yes and no as the keys of that dictionary. Then you have 2 lists which indicate what type of data you want to be in those columns. We're using Python to create this data frame. You can get a sense that you can put anything into data frames in a similar way as you can put any type of data into lists and tuples and dictionaries. That first data frame has integers in it. You're not limited to just integers. Here we have a data frame created that includes strings as entities inside your data frame. There are various ways you can learn about the syntax of how to do that. This is a dictionary list constructor that assigns column names. It automatically creates 0 row labels. But let's say we want to create our own row labels. You can also do that by adding a certain part to the creation of the data frame. If you do that, what you end up with is instead of 0 and 1 as row names, you end up with product A and product B as row names. A series is similar to a data frame. The biggest difference is that it is only 1-dimensional instead of 2-dimensional. It's like a vector. And each of the columns in the data frame is a series. Each column in a data frame is a series. It has its own index. And the series has its overall name, which can be considered a column name in a data frame. Here's another series that's created that has an index, just like the data frame mentions. Instead of 0 through 1 as we had up here, we have 2015 through 2017 sales as the index name. It's pretty unlikely that you'll create a data frame in the ways we just showed. It's much more common for you to have a file that you want to load data from into a data frame, which is how you're going to create a data frame most of the time. In this next section, we talk about reading data files. We're going to skip right to this line of code, which is .readcsv. .readcsv is one of the most important functions in the Pandas library. especially for beginners, because it helps you bring in data sets from the outside. In this case, we're going to bring in a .csv file from a data set. If you click up here on the upper right-hand corner and unfurl this part of the menu, you can see in this data box, we have various data sets preloaded in this particular lesson. One of them is wine reviews, and that's the data set that we're going to load first. If we execute this line of code, you can see that the data is being loaded into this wine reviews variable. And we can first see what's inside this variable now. This variable wine_reviews is a data frame. We can use the function .shape to see that this file has 129,000 rows and 14 columns. It has 130,000 wine reviews and 14 columns of different attributes. There's a function for Pandas, which is also very useful, called .head. We don't want to see the entire data set. We just want to see an example. .head allows us to see the first 5 rows of the data set. You can see 0 through 4 here on the left to indicate those first 5 rows. And you can see that each of the rows has various data about wine tasting. And this is something I love to do, actually, to taste wine and to understand where that wine is from and what kind of descriptors are used to describe the taste and essence of that wine. And here you even have information about the name of the taster and their Twitter handle. So these might be people leaving wine reviews on Twitter, it seems. So you can see all this data in here. This is obviously not something you could do easily using the notation that we learned at the beginning. It's all about loading data from these big files. Here is another situation where we are using what's called an attribute for read CSV, which is index column equals 0. Instead of creating its own index, it's going to use one of the columns in the CSV file to create its own index. Read CSV has lots of these attributes that allow us to tell .read CSV how we want it to load the data set. We'll cover that in upcoming lessons as well. Here we come to the end of the lesson. There's an exercise where you can solidify your abilities to learn about data frames, series, and the .read CSV function.